Video outdoors for a change, yay. Yeah, whatever. It's kind of cold. All the good weather's gone. Tolerable, but not nearly as nice as it was. I do have a lot of these daffodils this year. I love them here. Guess I should take some pictures of them, and I can use that as a background or some kind of crap like that. A bit of a pond here still, spring anyway. And so I guess that's it for the weather's kind of ominous. Guess I should have looked at the radar, but fuck it. Seems like I'm forgetting something, but who cares? Anyway, windy also. So a lot to be cranky about lately. Nothing, nothing going terribly right, but whatever. It's the party we're in. So anyway, whatever, Inventive Harvest guy did a video, and he's just rifling through a whole bunch of concepts and not really dealing with an argument, just again raising the same old arguments that have been dealt with hundreds of times previously. And yeah, so, well, whatever, I'll respond to it as best I can. I guess halfway walking, and maybe I'll finish inside or something. So anyway, he's always bending things into this economics kind of crap, which I like the idea of synthesis and analysis. I like the idea of analysis, analyzing a circumstance, find out what the constituent things are, blah, blah, blah. Kind of like getting to the gist of it, the straight line kind of thing. You have a recipe that has 100 ingredients, but you can cut it down to 10, sometimes, because that's all you really need is the 10. You don't need all this superfluous stuff. So kind of get it to its core, the root of it, the formula. But that's not what he's doing. So I mean, he's pretending that that's what he's doing, but his analysis is all full of fairy dust and glitter, in kind of obvious ways, which makes it pretty poor analysis. I don't know what those flags are for. Anyway, so he calls it some kind of environmental economics or something. It's just kind of a silly way to, as soon as you phrase something in that context, as if the environment should be telling us what to do, or we should be listening to the environment, or the environment's the boss, or some kind of crap like that, is all kind of silly, I think. The natural state is just as likely to wipe you out in an instant as any other circumstance. Nature will drop a comet on you, or some other kind of plague or some other kind of disaster. So it's all kind of silly to say it's the right way. It's just a crude force, and it's silly to say let's do what the crude forces suggest. So harm to the environment is kind of a wrong idea, unless you know what harm is, unless you can describe what this thing called harm is. The environment was no doubt flourishing wonderfully when it was substantially just plants on Earth. No animals, just plants. They did fine. They flourished. It was kind of a harm to their environment, for these other organisms to crawl out of the goo and start munching on them and fucking the party up, you could argue. So again, this idea of what you call a harm to the environment, what the nature should look like, I don't see any point in it. To say that its evolution is somehow going somewhere, it's not, fundamentally. It creates the same kind of things. The analysis would be something like the Australian example, that the carnivores that evolved in Australia ended up being very similar to the carnivores in any other location in the world. The same 4 legs good for chasing, 2 legs good for hopping, but it's not going to beat the 4 legs. Anyway, the 4 legs with bigger teeth, sharper teeth. So anyway, he got to the little segment of his, whatever it was, this video, where he's actually talking about the subject of antinatalism. He paraphrased the Benatarian type position, or my type position, as saying happiness is unimportant. That's not the way to say it. The point is it has no value absent the dependent, absent the need. Okay, it doesn't have any value. And the need is in the individual created. So if you don't create the needer, you don't need the happiness. And there's no negative condition in not having that relationship manifested. There's no negative condition on Mars or Uranus or Saturn or Neptune or any other place that isn't inhabited by beings full of themselves thinking they're important. So again, to say it that way is to make it sound like deprivation wouldn't be important. Of course it would be. The absence of happiness in beings that need it would be bad. The absence of individuals that need it isn't bad. That's the point. So it's an argument about necessity and the difference between something that has real value and something that has projected value. So we're back to that argument. And the basic of the argument is that in the end, quote unquote, when the block got washed, the only thing that has real value is unfortunately the negative. The positive is merely a manifestation of eliminating the negatives in, I would say, every case, but clearly in most cases. That's the circumstance. So if you don't create the negative, you won't need to create the positive compensation. So no work required. Don't make a mess. You don't have to clean up the mess. It's really that simple. It's a negative-based system. It's sewage let loose. And all you're doing is controlling the amount squandered, wasted. Sorry, we're doing a little maintenance here. So the water level recedes properly. And the block can be returned, to its proper position. Yeah, I just do not have the same agility I used to have. I almost didn't make that jump. Almost a disaster, for which you could have, if you're so situated, enjoyed. It really is cold. Getting cold. I should have worn more stuff. Anyway, it's just the most important word is this idea of understanding the difference between necessary and unnecessary. It's always necessary to fix a negative condition. It's never necessary to create a positive condition that has no negative consequence if you don't create it. If it's not correcting a negative, it really isn't doing anything of value. And again, I'll use the analogy of the absent Martians and the fact that we do not lament their non-existent joys and laughter and happiness, because it's not the real value. The real value is satisfying needs, not need itself. Okay, yes, ethical, no, ethical, risk imposition. This has to do with he's saying he doesn't like these yes or no ethical questions, and too bad. That's just a fact. Things will always have an answer. I don't think there's any real circumstances that are absolutely indecipherable in terms of what the right decision is. And the argument that you're not dealing with is the fundamental impositional nature. So just like I think it was a silly answer to say the joy of having kids is worth giving a kid cancer for. So taking some healthy child today giving him cancer today so you can have the joyful feeling of having kids. I'd say that was a ludicrous trade. And the point is, though, as a practical fact, that's what will happen in the world when you invest in Las Vegas, so to speak. If you invest in the gambling house, you will create the losers. You will create the mess. The Frankensteins. And so you have to account for you have to prove or demonstrate that what you're doing is worth that as the outcome. And if you can't, in my opinion, then you should be questioning this assumption of value. Just like I think human society, human culture should be questioning the value of the sport of football, or any sports for that matter, physical ones, that cause paralysis, death, and injury. I don't think any of those victims are worth the superficial gratification that is fundamentally made out of addiction. I don't think you could argue that if football was never heard of, that we would somehow innately miss it. So again, we're back to this missing the positive argument. You can't miss these positives, because the only way they're positive is you have to need them. You have to be addicted. So it's another big, huge word. It's the elephant word in the house, addiction. And you all seem to be evading that psychological phenomenon and paying it no mind, when it is the primary mechanism driving your motivation and, in my opinion, slanting and perverting your philosophical perspective. How much versus yes or no? So his argument was that somehow if we do this procreating thing the right way, it'll all be okay. That there's some right way to do it. And certainly there's wronger ways, but to argue that there's a right way, or that you're going to create some way to do it without the imposition of risk, without drawing the short straw and shoving it in the kid's pocket, I don't think there's a chance in hell that you're going to create that kind of harmless gameplay. And yeah, so I'm not going to argue a hope you have of an accomplishment I think has no practical attainability. So I think you still have to deal with the fundamental argument that you're cleaning up a little corner of the cesspool, or some measure of reducing the slaves by half is nice, but it's not good enough. That would be the argument. It's not close to good enough. Sustainability, again, I would argue as what? Sustainable human psychology, especially in a world of technology, is going to require humans to be almost imbeciles. To have no maliciousness, very little hate. You're just talking about creating Teletubbies. A village of a planet covered with Teletubbies who have been neutered out of any of the mechanisms, the native mechanisms of competition, greed, and the rest of it that are the motivation for most of us to wake up in the morning. So I think it would be to create a sustainable human is to create a ballless and meaningless human, in the sense of you have to eviscerate the passions, because the passions are all made out of that competitive nature. Perhaps you could mold them into some sort of contrived robotic dependency on doing good and getting happiness from good and all of that. But again, then what have you done? You've reduced yourself to smiley-faced toasters, to cartoon characters. You might as well just become, a drawing on a piece of paper and leave it at that than live the superficiality of a controlled psychology. That's even more banal, whatever the right word is, to do that on purpose, to manufacture a needful psychology, manufacture dependency. You know, that's so on its face fail. You've already conceded failure in a sense. As soon as you have to manufacture it, force it, then you're just building it. So it's like purposely building something that doesn't need to exist, that only serves its own purpose. It's like building firemen who start fires, and then firemen to put fires out. It's it's just so obviously contrived. Yeah, that would be the word. Obviously contrived. All right. Failure is inevitable. Yeah, so he did talk about some, the environment and extinction and all that stuff. Well, look, if this current crisis with the environment doesn't finish us off, we're going to get finished off. The David someday will fall, break into pieces. The Mona Lisa will burn. It's all going down. It's all going to be nothing. And all you're doing is begging for a few more humpity humps, as if that's somehow necessary. I can't see the necessity. I can't see the value in these few more laughs at the stupid joke when it's going to come at the price of big piles and buckets of misery, harm, and suffering. I just think it's ridiculous to make the argument that we haven't figured out it's a recycling game. It's just, make it, break it, forget, live, forget, live, forget, live, forget, live, forget. And it's only because of the forgetting that it becomes livable. Just like heaven would only be heaven if you could go there and forget who has died, who has suffered, and what you have seen. Yeah, you would gain no paradise. It's actually snowing. Shit. Yeah, shit, that's all I got to say. Shit. Alright, anyway, till the next time. Just having very good days lately. Last couple of days have just not been up to necessary standards. Anyway, till next time. I'm back. Yeah. Yay! Alright. Yeah, I'm back. Anyway, probably should use the other hand. Block more of the wind this way. So anyway, we left off somewhere about failure is inevitable. Really is just a matter of time. Whoa. Yeah. And I think we've done, when you think about it, you've gotten all you can get out of the gameplay. It's just a chase game. Create a need, gratify the need. That's all that's happening here on Earth. And to drag that out in some very dangerous future, where all kinds of deprivation looks likely, because you just won't say the words, I am addicted, I get it, it's just bullshit. It's just a DNA molecule replicating. You just can't say that and be done with it. Anyway. Alright, then he gets into all kinds of social bullshit, like whether we should be subsidizing kids and all this other kind of crap, and he doesn't even get to the real subsidies. He talks about having to educate them. Yeah, well, the public is paying $110,000 or $20,000 for that education. So that's a huge subsidy right there. And then you got health care and all this other crap, infrastructure, police, all this stuff to protect kids. Kids are a huge subsidy for children producing. And just get rid of the subsidies. and people have enough discouragement not to play the game. But clearly the only people breeding now are reckless poor people, and they're just reckless. There's no reason to justify or defend that. There's every reason to create social sanctions, actual penalties for that contempt for social structure, social cohesion, social health. Poor, arrogant poor people are the worst kind of criminal, is they just create this blight, and then they hold up the baby as blackmail and extortion and say, here, you can't hurt me because I have to raise this monster. And then they raise them into monsters, quite literally. So screw all the subsidies, and there'll be enough disincentive for people not to have kids. But you have to make poor people more accountable for their behavior. They're going to have to earn their subsidy by accepting responsibility. And if they can't manage it on their own, it should be imposed by society. They should have to get fixed. If they can't control their reproduction, yeah, you get fixed then. Then he talks about rebellion and all this other crap, like, it's so far from being as practical as it used to be. Rebellion from the outside is a whole different ball game. It's not like you can go to another country, make a deal with a king, to give you some mercenaries, to commit a coup, and take over the kingship. There was a ton of those kind of coups in the history of monarchies, and but yeah, there's no opportunity for rebellion. Quality requires more than just survival. This whole idea of sustainability, when all you're really saying is survivability, which is a very low standard. And that's the whole problem here. It's really, this argument isn't about, well, it is sort of, but even in the absolute sense, if I was to concede, that there is some manageable value to be preserved, you're not even going to come close to doing it with these low standards. Your standards are just too low. Survival's not the game. Quality, richness of experience is the game, and we sort of played that game out. People have been to Disney World. They've won their Super Bowls. For most people, it's just turned into a gulag. That's all this is now. You just grind away your life in service to the mammon, that'll put a few potatoes on your plate. And that's about all you can get. Can't certainly smoke anymore. That's only a rich man privilege. Just so I throw that in. Anyway, minimizing. Automizing? Nah, it couldn't be that. Cost of kids, education, your low standards. Yeah, well, so I think I've completed the piece of paper. There's still some crap he was saying, so I do have some further crap to go. So anyway, I have to get across here without falling in. See, this one wobbles. That's the trick. That's what almost threw me off. This is a wobbler. Yeah. It's always dangerous jumping off a wobble. Anyway, guess I didn't need to leave the camera on for that. No, I didn't. Anyway, sorry, just it's probably kind of a cruddy video, kind of noisy and all that crap, but tough. Anyway, trying. So I won't buy crunchy in here. Airplanes, just not hitting it. This isn't like a stellar week. I know I got worse ones coming. I'm just not, I don't want to. I'm really getting sick of it. Anyway, till next time. Alright, back inside. So let's finish up here. So this is sort of on the subject of having kids, extraction of labor, increased automation, access, social. Sorry, I was making some argument that people need to have kids to do their gardening for them. Kids need kids, people need kids as a social security policy, like somehow we take care of you when you're young and then you're obligated to take care of us when we're old kind of crap. Like somehow that's a fair contract. I don't remember agreeing to that. No. I never signed any such contract.
Through technology, basically we're producing more now for output of labor than we were in the past. Therefore, increased automation results in people needing to have less kids.
Yeah, well, whatever. You can talk about this extra production, but the fact is there's more people in absolute numbers living in absolute shit than ever before. And no matter how long we make our lives, the amount of time we spend in our lifetime disabled and debilitated has increased, not decreased. So the actual conscious hours we spend on Earth are currently worse than the conscious hours spent on Earth in the past, which isn't really good, right? Yeah, it's better to die at 40 healthy, generally speaking, having generally been healthy your entire life, than to live to be 80 and spend 40 years debilitated. Yeah, I think much better. I mean, I think it's just a fact that consciousness spends more time suffering now than consciousness was experiencing humans than it was in the past, even though the pains they had were more dramatic in some ways. You died quickly. Man, we don't do that anymore.
Similarly, social care for the elderly, if we do that as a society, then it decreases the
Yeah, it's just a total waste of money. I mean, if you're going to be economic about it, they don't have any value. Their utility is used up. They're not worth investing in if you're going to be economic about it. They have no utility, so it's some sort of obligation for what purpose? Oh, yeah, I don't know what it would be. So they can drool in a nursing home. Oh, brilliant. I don't want to subsidize that.
Benefits of having kids for someone to be able to take care of you when you're older.
Again, if that is your intent in having children, I'd say you belong in bars, behind bars, or you belong in chains, or you belong getting whipped by a hose or something. If you're having kids for their utility, fuck you.
Personal status, especially back in the in older times and in less developed countries, having a big family is a measure of personal status.
Yeah, well, whatever. That's only true now in the stupid parts of the world, and guess what? Those are the parts that are breeding. None of this argument applies to normal people anymore. So, again, antinatalism has already won the day with 80% of the human race. It's only the dumbest motherfuckers on Earth creating human perpetuation.
So instead, we can emphasize other things.
Idiocracy, they call it.
And say, hey, your personal status comes from your morality. We'll emphasize morality. And being a good person is what makes you a good person. Emphasize productivity.
I don't even know what that means, but yeah, obviously our definitions of morality, whatever that would be, and productivity are entirely different. Quality of life, not quantity. Quality of experience, not quantity. Again, we've already had the quality experiences. We've already sucked all you can suck out of this dick.
Providing for other people by going to work. That we can attribute to personal status. Therefore, people don't need to have kids in order to have personal status.
I don't think they ever did need to or have to. Obviously, in the past, people didn't have much choice because they didn't have convenient birth control. Birth control is mostly convenient now, but again, it's another third world problem. First world people have it, third world people don't. That's not good. That's upside down. Nobody's doing anything to fix it.
And child mortality. If the
If you got them, kill them. I don't even know what this means anything. Why does child mortality mean something? I mean, I guess depending on what you're calling the child mortality. But obviously the number of children who die is very low. I mean, you're much more likely to die when you're older than when you're a child.
chances that your child's not going to survive are high, then you'll have more kids in order to have one that does survive.
Well, that doesn't even make any sense. The total number of kids obviously doesn't have much to do with how many die. I really don't think so. Obviously, there's people that have 10 kids and like 5 of them die, but they still have 5 kids, which is way too many. So what's the difference?
So we can counter this by having increased health services. We can counter this by having...
I think that would just be oxymoronic. Give them more food, give them more stuff, and they just keep turning it into babies. They're not making babies because their babies die. They're making babies because they're too stupid to do anything else.
Increased sanitation, that's a big one. Increased sanitation, reduce...
I don't know how increasing sanitation is going to make people more socially responsible. But whatever. It's silly.
Is child mortality significantly. So, there's that, and then inequality. If you want one of your kids to be successful in life, then increased social mobility will make it so that you...
Yeah, so whatever. Like, we've got the same social mobility we had under, the kings. That's just a practical fact. 3% of people escape where they're born to. 3%.
It'll increase the probability that an individual will, be successful. Therefore,
yeah, whatever. This whole idea that there can be some sort of equality in success when we know the rich are getting richer, the middle class are disappearing quickly, and the poor are getting poorer. So all of this talk doesn't mean too much when we can see what's happening in reality under democratic presidents.
You won't need to have as many kids in order to try and achieve that probability. So,
here we go.
This has all been empirically verified. Basically, here we've got population on the left hand
Empirically, he says.
side of the graph and development on the right hand side of the graph. And this curve kind of goes up and reaches some point where people start having less kids, and we're kind of like here right now, and we're hoping it'll continue downward.
Well, that's not even accurate. This less kid thing is not accurate. So yeah, the tiny percentage of the world's population growth countries are having less kids, but the absolute growth of the undeveloped countries. So this just is projecting some sort of development that's going to take place, and you're claiming it's going to take place and that something's going to happen, but there's no evidence that it will take place. There's no evidence that there's every prospect that there's going to be huge economic crisis which will increase birth rates.
To some point where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost, but that would be assuming that this trend is going to continue, which is the fallacy of induction. So far it looks like that this is what's happening. As we get more developed, then people have less kids. And
look, the developed world will have less. Oh, they'll have zero. They won't even have less. They have zero population growth. But as long as they keep importing the external excess population, it doesn't make any difference. So, this whole idea fails as long as you give the poor a license to keep popping out 5 kids.
that trend continues in the future, but it's not guaranteed. So,
I don't even think it's a trend, to tell you the truth. It's just a hiccup after the baby boom or something, but not much of a hiccup.
So some benefits are not diminishable. That's why I won't ever reach down to zero, right? There's joys in having a family and going to the zoo and all that.
Well, whatever. They're not joys you can impose some pain on somebody else for. So again, if you want to sit there and go to the zoo, that's your business. Fine, go to the zoo all you fucking want. You want to sit there and make plastic kids to play with, that's okay with me. But as soon as you sit there and impose on real ones, no, it's not just that's your right. It's not your right to use something as a toy.
This kind of stuff. When you have kids, you get to see the world again through their eyes.
Well, again, that is not. You don't have any right to impose to gain that view. Okay, you have to do your viewing for yourself. You can't use something else to gain your gratification of some view you want to do.
And
I'm not your fucking entertainment device. Nobody, I mean, if you put a gun in my hand and you birth me into this world and you tell me I had you because I wanted to entertain myself, I'm going to shoot you in the fucking head. It's intrinsically crap reason. It's a crap reason. You should be shot just for having a crappy reason. It's a crappy reason to impose on anything, especially imposing risk.
you get to teach them how to do mathematics, and you get to
Yeah, well, for every one of those subjective little joys, there's 10 million you don't get the liability of things. Yeah, you don't have to delouse your house, and you don't have to, worry about, when Junior's going to cut his fucking arm off, or, crack his sister's head open, or some other kind of bullshit.
see the world anew again and be able to look at the world.
Again, this is just subjective bullshit. You might as well tell me how you like to masturbate. Now, if somebody told me I like to masturbate by cutting a woman's head off and rubbing it on my dick, I'm going to say you don't have a right to do that. You don't have the right to impose on somebody to gratify yourself, shithead. Your gratification is not an excuse for procreation. It's not.
Their eyes. Explain all the,
Risk imposition. That's what this argument's about. Okay, it's not risk you accepting risk to yourself. It's you imposing risk on somebody else. That's the issue.
Like the 2-year-olds are always asking why, and you have to explain to them why.
Yeah, right. So generally speaking, they're all lies, correct? You lie, you propagandize, you bullshit, and in most cases you're able to snooker the little retard into being a jackass for the rest of its life. But that's all it is. It's all a bunch of fucking lies. You don't just say, you're just a selfish need machine who want. You're going to get a little hard dick. You want to stick it in vagina. Vagina ain't going to always be compliant, so you're going to have to weasel your way in with chocolate and candy bars and bullshit and nonsense, blah, 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 blah. Are you going to tell the little fucker the truth? No, you're just going to tell a bunch of fairy tales and nonsense. You're just going to lie. Constantly.
Everything is.
Lie to your victim.
And sometimes, as an adult, you've forgotten about why. So, that's one of the benefits that we're not going to.
Yeah, whatever. These benefits you take out of somebody else's hide. I'm just saying, this is just nonsense. Like I said, I don't care what you do to gratify yourself, but it has to be your business. You can't be trespassing on some fucking creature because you can create one. All of a sudden you own it. I mean, it's the ultimate slavery, huh? Oh, I made it, so it's mine. So if it was possible in the future to manufacture princesses, you go to the store at Walmart and you buy a little princess box and you pour some water on it and poof, little princess pops out. And now she's your slave. So no matter what you want to do, no matter how debaucherous or grotesque you want to be, she's somehow obligated to be your princess and to endure your whatever, your whatever they call that, your leering, disgusting, crap, because you poofed her out of a box. Fuck that.
To diminish. Also passing on the genetic code, if that's,
Yes, the argument from biology, right. The argument from crude forces say I have license. Well, crude forces don't give license. Crude forces are stupid crude forces. If you have a piece of paper signed by crude forces, well, guess what? It should mean absolutely nothing to anyone with any intelligence.
Anything you're into, evolution does make more complex organisms as it goes on.
Not anymore. Evolution is over. All right, we're annihilating more species, and certainly our evolution is long dead. If anything, we're just going to modify into some sort of, generic jerk-off.
And I like that, but it doesn't have to necessarily be my DNA that does it. I don't really think there's anything special about my DNA that I need to pass on.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody's DNA that needs passing on, so I guess that's my whole point, is certainly none of it needs to be done at all. It's just a silly indulgence. There's better ways for you to gratify yourself. I'm sure the chocolate donut would be just as good as this going to the zoo thing or something. I'm sure you can find some place else to go if going to the zoo means you have to make a baby to do it.
So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it informative. And again, I always welcome comments and responses. So thank you.
Well, I don't think you're getting to the point here. The point is the evolution is crude forces and an imbecilic mechanism. It kills 10,000 baby octopuses to make one octopus. It's not a standard to go by. It's not a place where we should go, let's go ask evolution. No, that's not what you do. So there's one point. The second point is you didn't even touch the imposition argument, which is, I don't care how many victims there are. I don't care how many, there's no rapes are acceptable. It's a zero tolerance policy. You don't have any right to impose any risk on anyone not willing to be your victim. I'm claiming I'm not willing to be your victim. I am a consciousness. I am a reflection of the consciousness. Essentially, I have a veto. As soon as you make one of me, I have a veto. And I'm vetoing the party you want to have. You're not doing it at my expense. I'm not going to be the barbecued pig for your fucking party. It's essentially what it is, right? There's an event. You're saying there's an acceptable that we take one person, slit him down the middle and gut him, and then barbecue him. But there's a logic rule that says he has to be willing. And if he's not willing, you can't do it. The party's over. You have to find some other entertainment, fuckhead. So anyway. So, moving on to the next, the next hour of horror. It's just 1 hour of, can't get worse. Oh, it just got worse. Oh, I got the hiccups. Yeah, and it just, anyway. Some weeks are harder than others.